A silver storm of cinematic excellence is heading your way, bringing a flood of new perspectives and raw emotions. Brace yourself for the impact of stories that hit like lightning and linger like thunder. Subscribe today and ride the storm of great storytelling with us right now.
He took the house. My sister said it like she was reporting the weather. Flat, unbothered, already moving on to the next item on her agenda. I stood in the doorway of my childhood bedroom, still holding the box of my mother's things I had just carried up from the car, and I looked at her. "What do you mean he took the house?" She exhaled, long and slow, the way she always did when she thought I was being dramatic. "Marcus's name is on the deed, Maya. Has been for 3 years. Mom signed it over when the medical bills started piling up. She thought she was protecting the family." I set the box down on the floor, very slowly. My mother had been dead for 11 days. My sister was standing in her living room wearing a blazer, holding a clipboard, and telling me that the home I grew up in no longer belonged to us. "So what happens now?" I asked. She finally looked up. "We are selling it. Marcus already has a buyer lined up. We close in 6 weeks. I want you out of here by the end of the month." I felt the floor tilt. "I live here, Claire. I moved back to help take care of Mom. You know that." She clicked her pen. "And we appreciate that," she said in a tone that made it clear she did not appreciate it at all. "But the situation has changed. Marcus needs the equity to cover some business expenses. I will have Ethan drop off some boxes later this week." I stared at her. "Claire, this is our parents' home." She tucked the clipboard under her arm. She said, and then she walked past me and down the hallway like she had just wrapped up a quarterly review meeting, not like she had just taken a sledgehammer to the only solid thing I had left. I did not cry until I was in the backyard. I sat on the old concrete steps behind the kitchen, the ones my father poured himself the summer I was 7, the ones with my handprint pressed into the corner, small and lopsided because I had been so proud. I sat there and I let myself feel it, all of it, the grief and the exhaustion and the particular specific humiliation of realizing that while I had been sleeping on a cot in my mother's hospice room, holding her hand through the nights, my sister and her husband had been quietly signing documents. "My name is Maya. I'm 31 years old. I am a licensed paralegal with 7 years of experience reading contracts that other people sign without understanding. And somehow, impossibly, I had missed this one. I had moved back home 2 years ago. My mother's diagnosis came in fast and brutal, stage 4, and the oncologist did not sugarcoat the timeline. Claire had called me the day after the appointment. She was very composed. She said, "Mom needs someone there, full-time, and Marcus and I simply cannot relocate right now. His company is at a critical stage." I remember thinking that was a strange way to phrase it. Not "we cannot," but "we cannot right now," like it was a matter of scheduling rather than a choice. I had sublet my apartment in Cincinnati, packed my car, and driven 14 hours to Phoenix to be there. For 2 years I was there. I handled the medication schedules and the insurance appeals and the nightmare of prior authorizations that the insurance company kept losing. I drove my mother to chemotherapy at 7 in the morning and held a bucket when she needed it and read aloud to her from her favorite mystery novels when she was too tired to hold the book herself. Claire came to visit 4 times. Each visit lasted a weekend. She brought expensive flowers and cried beautifully and posted about it on her Instagram with a caption about strength and family. Marcus came twice. He shook my hand both times like I was a service provider he was mildly satisfied with. When my mother was placed in hospice, I started sleeping at the facility. I gave up my room at the house to make space for medical equipment storage. For the last 3 months of her life, I lived out of a duffel bag and a folding cot. I was holding her hand when she passed. Claire was on a flight from Denver. She landed 2 hours later. At the funeral, Marcus had put his arm around me and said, "You were so strong through all of this. The family is so grateful." I had thought it was a kind thing to say. Sitting on my father's concrete steps, I understood what it actually was. A performance review, a closing statement, a door swinging shut. My mother had left behind very little in liquid assets. The medical bills had consumed almost everything. What remained was the house, a 3-bedroom craftsman in a quiet Phoenix neighborhood, the kind of house that had tripled in value in the last decade, not because anyone improved it, but simply because the city grew up around it. It was worth a lot. And my name was not on anything. I had 2 weeks to figure out where I was going to live. I had a paralegal salary that I had not been earning for 2 years. My savings account had a number in it that I did not like to look at directly. Claire had offered me one thing in her breezy dismissal of my entire existence. "You can have whatever is in the storage unit," she had said. "The one in the industrial park on Route 9. I do not even know what is in there. Mom never told us and I never bothered to check. It is paid through the end of the year at least. Probably just old furniture. I wrote down the unit number she gave me on the back of a receipt, and I did not think about it again for 4 days because I had more pressing problems. But on the 5th day, after I had applied for 3 paralegal positions and been turned down for 2 rental apartments because my employment gap was too long, I drove out to Route 9. The storage facility was the kind of place that looks exactly the same in every city in America. Chain link fencing, security cameras with a blinking red light that may or may not be recording, rows of identical orange rolling doors with padlocks. The manager, a man in his 60s named Dale who was deeply absorbed in a crossword puzzle, looked up when I came in. I gave him the unit number. He checked his records. Signed in for almost 30 years, he said, shaking his head with mild admiration. Your mom was current on payments right up until the end. Never missed one, not even during COVID. He handed me a key attached to a number tag. Unit 47, end of the row. I drove to the end of the row and parked. Unit 47 was a standard 10 by 20 with a padlock that was not the flimsy kind. It was a serious lock, a heavy disc lock, the kind you put on something you care about. I noticed that. My mother had been meticulous about certain things. She would sometimes let the gas bill slide by a week, but she had never, in my memory, lost a document or misplaced a key. She had maintained this unit for 30 years. Every month, without telling her daughters, I opened the padlock. The door rolled up with more resistance than I expected. The seal was tight, which was also unusual for a basic storage unit. The first thing I felt was the air. It was not the warm, stale air of a room that had been sealed for months. It was cool. Noticeably cooler than outside. The second thing I noticed was the smell. Clean. Not the mothball and dust smell I had been prepared for. Something more neutral. Controlled. I stepped inside and reached for the light switch. The fluorescent bulb flickered on, and I stood very still for a moment. The unit was organized with a precision that felt almost clinical. Along the left wall were filing cabinets, 4 of them, metal, labeled in my mother's handwriting. Along the right wall were shelves, deep industrial shelves, the kind you buy at a warehouse supply store. On the shelves were flat storage boxes, long and thin, the kind used for documents or artwork. They were wrapped in acid-free paper and labeled with a numbering system I did not immediately recognize. In the back corner was a small dehumidifier plugged into a power outlet. It was running. The unit had electricity. I stood there and I did a mental inventory the way I do when I am reviewing a case file for the first time. I look for the thing that does not fit, the thing that requires explanation. In a storage unit full of old furniture, you do not install a dehumidifier. You do not label flat storage boxes with a cataloging system. You do not spend 30 years paying for climate control to protect old furniture. I walked to the shelves first. I carefully lifted the acid-free paper from the nearest box. Inside, protected by glassine layers, was a painting. Not a print. Not a reproduction. An oil painting on canvas, small, maybe 12 inches by 16, a still life of flowers in a blue vase. Painted in a style I recognized immediately because I had taken 1 semester of art history and that professor had been the kind of person who made you feel the paintings rather than just memorize them. I did not know what it was, but I knew what it felt like. It felt expensive. I checked 3 more boxes, 3 more paintings, each one wrapped with the same care, each one with a small label in my mother's handwriting on the back of the glassine, a number, a date and 2 letters, E.M. I walked to the filing cabinets. The first one was locked. The second one opened. Inside were folders, organized by year, going back to 1987. I pulled the oldest one. Inside were receipts, purchase receipts, for calories, from galleries, from estate sales, from private collectors, my mother's name on each one. Eleanor Margaret Voss, E.M. My mother had been a receptionist at a dental office for 31 years. She drove a Honda Accord. She clipped coupons. She bought generic cereal and said it tasted the same. She had sent me to college on financial aid and part-time jobs in a quiet ferocity about education that I had understood as practicality. I had never, not once in my life, seen her set foot in an art gallery. I sat down on the concrete floor, holding a purchase receipt from 1994 for a painting bought at an estate sale in Santa Fe for $400, and I understood that I had not known my mother the way I thought I had. I spent 3 hours in that unit. I went through every folder I could open. By the time the light outside had shifted to late afternoon gold, I had a rough picture assembled from 30 years of receipts and handwritten notes. My mother had started buying art the same year I was born. Small purchases at first. Estate sales, garage sales, regional auction houses. She had an eye, or she had luck, or she had both. Over the decades, the purchases had grown more deliberate, more significant. The notes in the folders were not casual, they were researched. Provenance checks, condition reports, notes on artists, on movements, on the market trajectories of specific periods. My mother had taught herself something I had no name for yet. There were 41 pieces in that unit. I did not tell Claire. I drove home and I sat at the kitchen table and I thought for a very long time. I am a paralegal. My entire professional life is built on reading documents carefully, on understanding what words actually mean versus what people assume they mean, and on knowing the difference between what is and what is legal. So I thought about that. Claire had said, "You can have whatever is in the storage unit." She had said it dismissively. She had said it the way you tell someone they can have the last slice of bread because you are on a diet. She had not asked what was in it. She had not verified the contents. She had not consulted Marcus. She had simply offered it to get me out of her way, but she had said it in front of a witness, in a house with security cameras that I happened to know recorded audio because my mother had set up the system herself. I called my friend Deb. Deb and I went to college together. She is now an estate attorney in Scottsdale. I told her what I had and I asked her what my options were. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Did you put it in writing?" "Not yet," I said. "Get it in writing." Deb said, "To Jay if possible. Whatever you do, do not tell her what is in there first." I texted Claire that evening. I said I appreciated the offer of the storage unit and I wanted to make sure we handled the transfer formally so there were no complications with the estate. I told her I could have a simple one-page asset transfer agreement drafted within the day since I had the professional background to do it quickly. I told her it would protect both of us legally. She replied in 12 minutes, "Fine, whatever, just send it over. I have enough to deal with." I drafted the agreement that night. It was one page. It was very clear. All contents of Storage Unit 47 at Desert Star Self-Storage, Route 9, Phoenix, Arizona, as of the date of signing, are hereby transferred to Maya Christine Voss as part of the informal distribution of Eleanor Margaret Voss's personal property with full agreement of both parties. I used plain language. No legal jargon that might make her read carefully. I listed the unit number, the facility name, and the address. I did not describe the contents. She signed it the next morning via DocuSign while she was presumably still in her bathrobe, because the timestamp was 7:14 a.m. She did not ask a single question. I called Deb as soon as the signed document came through. Deb made a sound I had never heard her make before in the 15 years I had known her, a kind of stunned, professional exhale. Then she said, "Okay. Now we move carefully." She referred me to a colleague, a man named Patrick O'Coffer, who specialized in art appraisals and had relationships with the major auction houses. I brought him to the unit on a Thursday morning. I watched him the way I had watched Graham in the other story, the one I had read once about a woman who found cars in a warehouse, the story that had made me think about what my mother kept telling me in her last months, that everything she had done had been for a reason, that I should trust the slow work of careful hands. Patrick did not say anything for the first 10 minutes. He moved through the unit with gloves and a small ultraviolet light, lifting and examining, making notes on a tablet. He was not dramatic about it, he was methodical. That was more frightening somehow. When someone dramatic goes quiet, it usually means nothing. When someone methodical goes still, it means something has shifted. He came to stand beside me near the door. He took off his gloves. He said, "I need to ask you something before I go any further. How much do you know about your mother's background?" "Not much," I told him honestly. "She was private about certain things." He nodded slowly. "Do you know if she had any connection to the New Mexico art scene in the late 80s? "She bought a piece at an estate sale in Santa Fe in 1994, I said. "I have the receipt." He looked at me. "Do you know whose estate it was?" I shook my head. He turned back to the shelves. He pointed to a painting in the third row, a large one I had not yet unwrapped, labeled in my mother's system as piece number 23. "That piece," he said carefully, "matches the description of a work that was reported missing from a private collection in 1991. Not stolen," he clarified quickly, because I had straightened up immediately. Missing in the sense that, when the collector died, the estate could not locate it. It was assumed lost. If this is what I think it is, the estate has been looking for it for 30 years. And the provenance would be clean because your mother has purchase documentation from the liquidation of a related property. He looked at me. "This is a very significant piece, Maya. I need you to understand what I mean when I say significant. I can give you a range once I complete the verification, but I want you to be prepared. I have been doing this for 22 years. This is the most unusual unit I have walked into. I gripped the edge of the door frame and breathed. Give me the range, I said. Preliminary and conservative. He looked at his tablet, then back at me. For the full collection, I said. He paused. Between $4 and $7 million. If the piece I just identified is verified, you are looking at the higher end of that range, possibly beyond it. I kept my face very still. I have trained myself to do that. Years of sitting in depositions where the numbers are large and the stakes are human and you cannot flinch because flinching is information. $7 million. My mother had been driving a Honda Accord and clipping coupons and quietly, methodically, over 30 years, building something extraordinary in a 10 by 20 room at the end of a row in a chain-link storage facility on Route 9. She had never told Claire. She had never told Marcus. She had paid the rent herself every month for 3 decades. She had installed the dehumidifier herself. She had built the cataloging system by hand, and when she was sick and the bills were mounting and Claire was asking her to sign documents, she had not touched it, not one piece. She had protected it. For me, I understood that now with a clarity that made my chest ache. She had known what she was doing. She had known who was paying attention. 2 weeks later, Claire called me. Her voice had a new quality to it, careful, like she was walking on a floor she was no longer certain would hold. I heard you hired an attorney, she said. Yes, I said, for the estate matters. She paused. Marcus wants to talk. About an equitable distribution. I let the silence sit for a moment. I thought about my mother on the concrete steps in the hospice garden, 3 weeks before she died, squeezing my hand and telling me that patience was not the same as passivity, that waiting for the right moment was not weakness, that everything she had done quietly had been done on purpose. I think I need to go through proper legal channels on this, I said. Given the complexity of the estate, Claire's voice tightened. Maya, we are family. I let myself take one breath. Family, I said. That is an interesting word. When you needed someone to give up their life for 2 years, family meant me. When the deed went into Marcus's name, family meant Marcus. When Mom asked someone to hold her hand in the middle of the night, family meant me. But when it came to the asset that actually has value, suddenly you are interested in family again. She started to say something. I said, my attorney will be in touch. The auction was held in Scottsdale 8 weeks later. 41 pieces, catalogued, authenticated, provenance verified. Patrick stood beside me in a room with pale walls and careful lighting and people holding numbered paddles, and he was professional and composed. But when Lot 23 came up, the large piece, the one that had been missing for 30 years, he leaned toward me and said quietly, your mother found this at an estate sale for $300. I looked at the painting. The bidding opened at $400,000. It closed at $1.3 million. Total auction result, $6,840,000. After fees and taxes, just over $5 million went into an account with my name on it. My name only. Claire found out the morning after the auction closed. She called 17 times. I let the calls go to voicemail. On the 18th call, I answered. I could hear Marcus in the background, his voice low and sharp, coaching her. She said they were consulting their own attorney, that there might be a claim on estate assets that had not been properly disclosed. I told her to have that attorney contact Deb. Deb would be delighted to walk him through the signed asset transfer agreement, the DocuSign timestamp, the security camera footage from the kitchen where Claire had verbally offered me the unit, and the 30 years of purchase receipts that bore my mother's name and no one else's. I told her that the legal position she was describing would be expensive to pursue and unlikely to succeed. I told her I hoped she thought carefully before proceeding. She did not proceed. Marcus sold the house on the original timeline. I did not fight it. I did not need to. I used part of my mother's legacy to buy a small craftsman 3 miles away, in the same neighborhood, similar vintage, same style of concrete front steps. I poured a new section of the back patio myself, a small square at the corner, and I pressed my hand into the wet concrete, the way I had done at 7 years old, the same way my father had shown me. Because some things are worth preserving, and some things you build quietly over a very long time, and some people will never look closely enough to understand what they are standing next to. Claire texted me 6 months later. A brief message. She said she hoped I was doing well. She said things had been stressful. She said she thought about Mom a lot. I read it twice. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter of my house, in my kitchen, in the home I had bought with the inheritance my mother had spent 30 years protecting for me. And I thought about patience, and about the slow work of careful hands, and about the difference between what is quiet and what is gone. I did not reply. Some closings do not require a signature.